Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos every week for a couple of different reasons. The first of which is just to take my brain out of the mode of background work over the course of the week and move into the process of writing and preparing the sermon that I'm going to preach to my congregation for the weekend. That is the first reason. And the second is just to allow you, the viewer who've come across this video for whatever has brought you here today, whether you're a regular weekly viewer or you just happen to stumble across this, to help you gain some different insight into the assigned text for the week. So that's why I do these. This particular Sunday, which is November 12th, 2017, the 23rd Sunday after Pentecost, our gospel lesson comes out of Matthew chapter 25. Give just a little touch of background before I really dive into things here. We're getting very close to the end of the church year. We have just a few weeks left, actually just 3 or 2 weeks after this coming weekend, before the end of the church year. If you're familiar, the church calendar doesn't quite match up with the actual calendar, and the beginning of the church year typically starts in either right at the tail end of November or at the beginning of December, just kind of depending on how dates fall, and begins there. So right now we're again at the tail end of what we call year A here in the lectionary, the year of Matthew. And after this Sunday, then we'll have one more regular Sunday after Pentecost, and then culminating Thanksgiving weekend, which is the 26th, so 2 weeks from now, with Christ the King Sunday. And that one is the final Sunday of the church year before starting with Advent, the first Sunday of December. So that's kind of where we're at now. And every year, as the season of Pentecost goes on, it's a long, long season. You know, it starts up 50 days after Easter. That's the word I'm looking for. So fairly early towards it, kind of in the late spring, early summer range is when that kicks off, and the season kind of stretches out all the way until Advent kicks in. And through that, we tend to see the different texts, the different focal points of kind of shifts through the ongoing life of the church post Pentecost, post Jesus' ascension, and post arrival of the Holy Spirit. And when we get to this final portion, which is where we're reaching now, kind of right after All Saints Sunday, which was a week ago, we begin to see what's called the apocalyptic text, as Jesus' teaching and his focus lies upon the end times. That's kind of the best way to sort of summarize it. And again, this happens every year. Usually it happens in the form of parables, not always. Sometimes it's just more of a different type of teaching from Jesus, but oftentimes it's in parables. And that's what we see today. That's kind of what's kicking off here in Matthew 25, 1 through 13. It's the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. Sometimes it's called the wise and the foolish bridesmaids, but it is a parable that's aimed at that. Again, some background towards this specific thing rather than just general like church year stuff. This passage occurs within a larger block of teaching from Jesus, all within the final week of his life, as he's in the city of Jerusalem for celebrating the Passover, to celebrate the Passover, which is going to lead to his arrest and his death and his crucifixion, or same thing there, his death by crucifixion. So it makes sense that this teaching is happening, but what has actually occurred? He and his disciples have been in the temple, which is very common during this week. He's kind of in and out of the temple and in and out of the city throughout the course of this week. And the disciples are marveling at the temple itself, at the temple buildings, at the structures, all of that. And while I've not been there, I've heard people tell of the immensity of the stones that are part of the whole temple structure. And they're enormous. I mean, we're not talking like a little paver stone. We're talking something that's the size of a house. I mean, very, very humongous stones. And they're marveling, and Jesus says there will come a time when they will be thrown down and not one will lie upon another. And then from there, again, this is the beginning of chapter 24, they shift out of the city, and they're sitting on the Mount of Olives, and the disciples ask him, Lord, tell us when this will be. What will be the sign that this is about to happen? And when will we know to look for your reappearing? Because Jesus has already told them that I will come again. And So that's the basis for this question. It's essentially, Jesus, you're talking about the end times. You're talking about dire destruction and dire stuff. When will we know that's going to happen? That's really the big question. And this is a very common question that I think we deal with here in the church, that individuals ask. I know I have a lot of conversations about this of what do we look for, and when will we know that it's going to happen, and is it already happening? Should we be looking for Jesus to come in the clouds? And are we already in the end times, or what's it going to be like? And how do I know I'm okay? And all of these questions really kind of cycle around as we wait for the reappearing of Jesus. That is I believe, the basis for their question, for their question to Jesus of when will this be? And Jesus goes into a very long block of teaching, like I said, throughout all of 24, and then all of chapter 25 is all kind of part of this great big block of looking towards the end. And in this particular parable, we hear a switch compared to what we've had, particularly in the gospel lessons, but just in general, we hear a switch from Jesus saying the kingdom of heaven is like this, and we hear at the beginning, then the kingdom will be like, the kingdom of heaven will be like, so more future tense. And now, different parts of Jesus' teaching previous to this within the gospel have been future tense. For instance, the Beatitudes that were featured a week ago in the on All Saints Sunday, those have a very now and not yet sense. And this is very deep within Lutheran theology, this now and not yet. The idea that we live in the reality, in the promise of the kingdom here now, that it has come into the world with the first appearance of Christ, with the incarnation of Christ, and then the not yet of what will be. What will the new heaven and the new earth be like? And what will the world be like in the age to come? And what will we look like? And will we recognize? And all these questions that we don't have answers to yet. The mystery of the promise now that we are given now, that we live in now, along with the mystery of what is yet to come that has not yet been revealed. And that was, if you caught last week's video, I actually preached out of 1 Thessalonians, and that was kind of what I really focused on, that we live in the promise now of what has yet to be revealed. And that seems to be the sense that Jesus gives when he speaks of these apocalyptic things. That's kind of the big fancy word that we use, the apocalyptic, the end times, whatever you want to say. So with that, let's kind of jump into the text now that I've been talking for like almost 8 minutes, and let's get into that. So again, that's the context as Jesus is teaching, and then this is about midway through this long period of teaching that Jesus has been giving them. Jesus says to his disciples, then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there came a shout, "Look, here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all of those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." So that's it. Okay, so there's some different things going on in this parable. One thing that, pardon me as I have a little nose wiping thing, one thing that we need to acknowledge is that unfortunately we just don't really know that much about first century wedding customs to kind of know what the heck is going on here with these bridesmaids. It is thought that the way things would kind of go is the groom would go to the house of the bride's parents, or the house of the bride's father, and probably arrange whatever dowry situation is going on, or complete that, and then would bring his new bride to his father's house or his parents' house, to where the celebration would happen. And if we think about, like in John chapter 3, I think the wedding at Cana, and the wedding that Jesus is at, that's a celebration, and that would have been at the house of the groom's parents, and they are the host of that. Now, some people will come along to in this procession. And weddings, what we do know about this in first century Jewish culture, weddings were a huge deal. Pretty much everyone in the community would be a part of it, and it was actually such a big deal that certain situations would be like set aside, certain duties, like there were law things of ways to observe, whatever, that would actually be set aside in terms of this ongoing long, several day, upwards of a week celebration for this new for this new couple. And so hearing that the bridesmaids are coming along, are part of the procession, that in itself probably isn't that odd to think about. But what is a little strange to think about is just how the situation plays out. That we hear that the groom is delayed, and because of that, they all fall asleep while they're waiting. And then he shows up at midnight. He shows up in the midst of the night when sleep is at its deepest and it's least expected. And because of that, then we have this, or because of their previous preparation, we have this distinction between the wise and the foolish. Now, this to me, admittedly, is kind of troublesome because there's things at play here that make this a little bit more gray area than it initially seems. Now, we really like to have black and white. We really like to have things one side's right and one side's wrong. But there's a ton of gray area here, and let me get into that. So on one hand, we have wise and foolish. That's the way that they're designated. But usually when we think of wise, we think of that in a positive way. For instance, if someone's wise, they make good decisions. They know how to react in certain situations. We even think of wise King Solomon, although he had his issues too, but that's a side note. But the original Greek for that word, wise, could also be prudent. It could also be shrewd. It could also be crafty. And in fact, there are different times when that word is used, even in Matthew's gospel and by Jesus, in that method or in that way. For instance, if you think about when Jesus is sending the disciples out, and he tells them, you must be shrewd or you must be wise as serpents. That's not quite so positive. And also, if we look at the Greek translation of the Old Testament, going all the way back to Genesis 3, when we hear about the serpent was described as wise, so are these 5 wise bridesmaids, is it a positive thing, or is it maybe more of a shrewd backhanded thing? And we don't know precisely. Different scholars will kind of probably respond to that question in different ways. I question it. So that's one thing. Maybe they're not quite so positive. The other thing that's going on is the idea that why did they have lamps in the first place? In all likelihood, the preparation for the party would be going on during the day and not at night. So why did they bring lamps in the first place? Maybe they were coming out at dusk. I don't know. That's not given to us. But the only reason that the lamps play any part in this at all is because the groom was delayed. The groom didn't show up when expected. And because of that, the foolish who brought no extra oil with them hope they don't have any. And so first they ask, will you give some to us? And then the wise ones tell them, no, there won't be enough for us if we do that. Or maybe there won't be enough for us if we do that. So you better go try and find some of your own. So they run off to do it. Here's the other thing. They're all 10 sleeping. And keep in mind, Jesus says at the end, keep awake, stay alert. All 10 are sleeping, wise and foolish alike. All 10 of them fell asleep. Why? Because the groom was delayed. But they wake up when the announcement comes, look, here's the groom. So it sounds to me like he's there already. And the 5 run away from him. What do we take from that? That's a good question. What do we learn from that? But the thing that I really kind of struggle with is all 10 were caught up in the idea of the checklist of this is what I have to do in order to be ready for the banquet. The 5 foolish ones think we have to have oil. We have to have our lamps lit. And they run away from the groom in order to try and make that happen. And in so doing, they miss it. But they had asked first the other 5 to share. And the other 5 pretty much said kind of from the opposite direction, but kind of said the same thing. If we give you some, there might not be enough for all of us. So no, we won't give it any to you, because that means that then we'll be out of luck. And I really focus in on this because of the tendency that we all have to want to know that we are justified, to want to know that we are good to go as far as the eternal sense goes, so that we can all go into the banquet, so that we can all enter into this glorious, wonderful celebration, whatever it will look like in the age to come. So the questions circle in our minds, kind of like the disciples, clear back in 24, that prompted this whole thing of how can we be ready? How can we be prepared? And that to me is what tends to come out of this all the time. It's like, this is about being prepared. We have to be prepared for Christ because he's coming at a time when we don't expect. Now, side note, that statement right there, that's not wrong. And in fact, directly prior to this, Jesus tells kind of another story about the master who comes home earlier than expected, and finds, and what does he find from his servants? Are they awake and doing what they should be doing, or are they sleeping? That's the previous story. So we hear that the groom or the master or the Lord or whatever name we want to apply is going to come unexpectedly. Could be early, could be late. Now we've had 2,000 years of waiting, so it kind of seems like it's he's coming pretty late. Matthew was written around the turn of the first century, give or take, a decade or two. 70-ish odd years after Jesus' ascension. They've been waiting for decades. First Thessalonians, which again we had last week and is also one of the other featured texts this week. First Thessalonians was written by Paul in about the year 50 as a response because some believers were starting to die and Jesus isn't back yet. And so they're like, we're freaking out. What do we do with this? So the idea of waiting for the return of Christ is nothing new. And we've been waiting for a really long time. So the arrival of Christ, not if, but when it happens, it's going to catch us unaware. That's really what Jesus continues to say throughout this whole 2-chapter thing, is that there is no way to know. He says, no one knows the day or the hour, not even the Son. So Jesus, as he's sitting there, says, I don't even know when this is going to happen. So live your life in a way that reflects it now. That's that whole be prepared thing. And so that always raises the question, well, how do I do that? And it's not about the checklist. See, that's what the all 10 bridesmaids are caught up in, is my checklist complete? Because the 5 wise ones who brought oil, they say that if we give you some, there won't be enough, or maybe there won't be enough. And the other 5 say, well, if we don't have it, we're out of luck. So they run off and try and make it happen, instead of trusting in the grace of the bridegroom. What would have happened had all 10 stayed together under the light from 5 lamps? Will 5 lamps light the way for 10 people? I think it will. Would the groom have said, it's okay that your lamps aren't lit, come along anyway, I desire your presence, come into the banquet? We don't know. And they didn't give the chance to, they did not rely on the possibility of grace from the bridegroom. What's that say for us? It reminds us of the need for us to rely upon the grace of Christ, the grace of God, that is this free gift that's offered to us, instead of running away and being so focused on making sure we're good to go, on making sure that we've achieved what we need to achieve. How are we prepared? We trust in the promise that's given to us now, and we live our lives in a way that reflects that. Now, that does not ensure us our salvation, but that's how we live. That's how we live in the reality of the kingdom now, and Jesus gets into that more towards the end of chapter 25 of how we share the love of God with others. And it all boils down to something I've said many times before. Jesus is asked, what's the most important commandment? And he says, love God, love your neighbor. The law can be summed up in this. And I think that's what we do too. So how are we prepared? If that's the direction we want to go with this, we cling to the promise that we are already claimed, that we are already invited, and that's already done. and we live our lives in a way that reflects that same reality to everyone else, that they too are loved, that they too are invited. That's what's going on. I talked for a really long time, and I need to get this wrapped up, so thanks for sticking with me. But if you have thoughts, questions, comments, by all means, throw those in the comments section. We'll continue the conversation. Otherwise, have a blessed week, and we will catch you next time.